nice sunny day. And all right, so I'll be switching to my screen in a moment. I'm just putting some real Vermont maple syrup in my tea. All right, let's get started. So, axiomatic design. I'm going to do my best to, all right, so I'll be switching to my screen in a moment. Real set? Somebody else was talking. All right, so I'm sharing my screen. I assume everybody can see that. And so I'm going to try to give perhaps the shortest introduction I've ever given to axiomatic design. So hang on. Somehow my screen isn't advancing. There we go. So first, where did axiomatic design come from? Professor Nam Su, when he was at MIT, before he became department chair in the 1970s, started developing axiomatic design. And we'll be talking more about that and how that happened. But basically, he asked the question, are there axioms, rules, or laws that should govern engineering design, just like we have for mechanics? And so he was looking for commonalities in good designs. And the premise is that there should be, or there might be, self-consistent axioms that we should be looking for. And that they will lead us to the best solutions for all design problems. We had the International Conference on Axiomatic Design here at WPI 7 years ago, and he gave a keynote at that. So our objective, I want to explain the value of design theory and formal methods. We pretty much ignore design theory and formal methods at WPI, and that's nothing special. I think this is something that is often overlooked, particularly in the United States. Do I have control of my computer? All right. So we want to take a look at a philosophical foundation for this, which is something we don't often try to do. And we want to show how we can apply these axioms to the structure and process of design. So what is engineering design? How does it differ from what scientists do? So scientists look at things as they are and ask why. Engineers dream of things that never were and ask, why not? You notice there's a dog walking around on the moon. All right. Design is common to all kinds of engineering. We work with symbols. Symbols are not the thing. So what is the real nature of engineering design? Well, it's conceiving, planning, analyzing, selecting components for systems, building a consensus between stakeholders. It should be functionally based with clear objectives. So engineers create value by thinking. And as I am often fond of saying, we really don't have to do anything. We just sit back and think. And of course, we have to communicate our thoughts. So we ought to be wondering, if this is the way we as engineers create value, what is thought? And Eric Baum, in his 2004 book called What is Thought, says it's all about semantics. And semantics is equivalent to capturing and exploiting the compact structure of the world. So is there a compact structure to engineering design? Because we exploit this compact structure through language and mathematics and symbols and their logical manipulation to solve problems. Can we do this in engineering design? So there's meanings, relationships, argument structure. So for design, can we develop an appropriate symbolic representation of our design problems, manipulate the symbols logically to achieve the best design solution? So engineering design, is it an art or a science? Many people will argue that it is an art and we can't have axioms. And I think that's one of the problems in acceptance of axiomatic design, even on our campus. Art. Art is beautiful, cultural, subjective, experiential, emotional, wonderful in so many ways. And what is a scientific discipline? So a scientific discipline is one that has a few simple self-consistent laws or axioms that will solve a wide variety of problems. So, for example, Newtonian mechanics. But all right, design, philosophy or a science? So somebody wrote that philosophy is what we call sort of thought in its first state before it has a chance to solidify into a scientific discipline. So do axioms solidify the philosophy of design? So as we go from metacognition that's introduced by the Greeks to Newton. So let's take a look at what Newton did. Commonality. That's the basis for all scientific laws. What was Newton thinking? That there is some sort of common nature in the universe that can relate the motion of planets to apples falling off a tree on Earth. Big jump. Nice going, Newton. Recognizing commonalities across a wide variety of applications. So we can apply, or now I'm applied the same thing to design. Let's see if we can recognize some commonalities and begin a process of crystallization of ideas and solidify these ideas so that design moves from an art and philosophy to science. So here's something to reflect on. If you do engineering design without Sue's axioms, is this like solving mechanics problems before Newton's laws? So let's take a look at the axioms. 1, maintain independence of functional elements. So this makes a design adjustable and controllable, and we can avoid unintended consequences. Leads us to modularity in design, which you may have heard is a good thing. Let's see, there we go, controls back. So 1, independence. 2, information. Minimize the information content. So avoid unnecessary complexity, maximize the probability of success, make it robust. So information, sometimes we think more information must be good. How can we want to minimize information? So we have to think of information content in design is different than knowledge, because what we were really thinking about before was knowledge. So the more things I have to know to do something right, the more instructions I have to give somebody to accomplish something, the greater the probability is that we forget something or misinterpret something and are not able to do it right. So that's what's meant by information content here. And it can translate into tolerances. If we have a very tight tolerance, the probability of hitting it goes down. So simple is good, as Karl Popper pointed out. Simple statements tell us more. All right, so axiomatic design. It's a rational process, avoids unintended consequences, maximizes probability of success. We have a structure that we'll be looking at shortly that improves communication, helps us build consensus. Now, I've got a theory that any problem can be cast as an engineering design problem. And I believe that axiomatic design is the best way to address engineering design problems. Therefore, axiomatic design would be the best way to address all problems. So what are the elements? I was trying to, in the years I've been teaching axiomatic design, and I was first introduced to it in when I was in grad school in about 1980. Nam came from MIT up to the University of Vermont. Let's see if I can do this for a moment. So I don't know if people are seeing me as big or not, but I guess it depends how your screen's set up. Anyway, I was at the University of Vermont. Nam came up and gave us a talk. And previous to that, I thought design was drafting. And I had actually managed to place out of the drafting classes in college. So design, as Nam was saying, is about developing concepts. And now I'm trying to find where the share screen button is again. It seems to have disappeared. Help.
On the button.
There it is. I found it.
Yeah.
Okay, off we go again. I guess that was a bad idea to try to cut out. I thought it would add something to the talk. All right. Here we go. All right. So as I've been teaching this, as I say, there's really three elements. One is the axioms, which we've just seen, and we refer to them sort of in shorthand as the independence and the information axioms. Then we have the structure, which we need so that we can actually apply the axioms systematically. And then we have a process for creating the structure. And we'll be taking a look at all of these things. Let's consider some of the naturalness of Nam's axioms. So if I ask somebody, how do you choose between different solution candidates in design? Some people will say, we should choose the simplest. And we often hear this KISS, keep it simple, stupid. So axiomatic design essentially decomposes simplicity, the simplicity directive, into two parts. Because if I'm designing something that's fairly intricate, and intricate could be a shoe, it could be a car, it could be a bicycle, an aircraft carrier. I need to decompose it. And just to say, well, we'll take the simplest, I need a systematic way of doing it. So we'll decompose simplicity into two parts, axiom 1 and 2. So independence provides adjustability and control, avoids unintended consequences. Sometimes we put a series of events into operation, not realizing exactly where it's going to go. So we'll be looking at a kind of functional modeling, and it's often this failure to recognize how things are connected that leads to failures in design or cost overruns and time overruns in design. So importance of axiom 1, it's adjustability. It's about adapting to change. Change is everywhere. So design is about solving problems. This means changing something. So the universe is not in equilibrium. Something is always changing. Weather, people, needs. Who knows when we'll be in the middle of a pandemic. And functions need to be adjusted. So this ties into calculus. Why is calculus so important? Because it's modeling change. It's about change. dy dx describes how one thing changes with respect to another. That's all about slopes on curves, and that's what differential calculus is about. All right, let's take a look at an example. And so we could take a look at this. This was the sink in the men's room in Washburn a few years ago. And we could ask, is this a good design? Well, it really depends on what the customer needs are. So let's suppose we want to wash our hands. It's been an important topic for a few weeks now, although we're not doing it in Washburn. So what does the user want when they wash their hands? And we have to keep in mind there's other stakeholders. All right. So the customer need is, let's say we would like water at the right temperature and the right flow rate. Okay, so what do we have? We have got two valves or two handles that operate two valves, cold water and hot water. Our functions, though, which we should work out first, are adjust the temperature and adjust the flow rate. So now we can really ask the question, is this a good design? So if we take a look, function 1 is about temperature, function 2 is about flow rates. That's FR, functional requirement 1 and 2. And then DPs, design parameters. These are the physical solutions. All right, so we've got a cold water valve and a hot water valve. So we're taking a look at a little design matrix we're making here. So we look at DP1. If we adjust the cold water valve, we change the temperature, but we also change the flow rate. Same with the hot water valve. If we adjust that, we change the temperature and the flow rate. So I might go into use a sink that I'm unfamiliar with the first time, guess at a little bit of adjusting the two valves, stick my hands under the water. It's too hot. So I'll turn up the cold. Now the flow rate's too high. And so what this is telling me is that I'm going to have to iterate to see if I can make the system converge on a solution. This is not a good design. It's what we call fully coupled. So we've lost independence of the functional elements, temperature and flow rate. So these sorts of non-productive iterations are things we would rather avoid. So some of you may remember our orbital space plane. This was certainly a big deal in the development of it when I was in grad school. Some of you may remember it had some problems. And some of us remember exactly where we were when the Challenger blew up. Let's think about this critically now in terms of axiomatic design. So what are the functional requirements for our space shuttle, erstwhile space shuttle? Well, 1 was carry people into orbit, and 2, carry cargo into orbit, because if all you do is put people up there, it's not going to work very well. So you needed people and stuff to go with them. Of course, get them back too. I guess I should have put that on. So we also need some workspace in orbit. So the question is, could these be handled or satisfied independently? Why were they all coupled on the same launch vehicle? Well, probably to do something that'll get through Congress. But when they did that, they were no longer maintaining the independence of the functional elements. NASA learned how to dock during Gemini. We docked before we went to the moon. We could easily have put people in a separate orbital space plane, and the cargo could have gone up separately, and the workspace could have gone up separately. And we know that because we have Skylab. All right, let's take a quick look at information. So information is about the probability of success, and it's actually quantifiable. So information is the log of 1 over the probability of success. This is related to like Boltzmann's constant or Boltzmann's equation for entropy. It's K log W. It's also related to Shannon's independence or information. So the idea is to reduce uncertainty and complexity. So minimize the possibilities of error, minimize the impact of wear, temperature, and other variables. So this is robust design. So successful solutions will do a better job at accommodating variability or change. All right, let's take a look at the structure. So the axioms are implemented in the structure during the decomposition process. We're going to be talking more about decomposition. So we need to formulate good functional requirements and select the best design parameters of the physical solutions to solve the problems. So we can divide the design space or design domains, or we can have 4 design domains. We can design it into 4 parts. So first, customer needs. What is going to provide value to the customer? 2, functional. What functions do I need to provide the value to the customer? 3, the physical space, design parameters. What does it have to look like in order to provide the functions that will satisfy the customer needs? So, and then how do I make it? What manufacturing processes do I need to make the physical elements that will satisfy the functional requirements or fulfill the functional requirements that will then satisfy the customers? So mostly we're going to talk about these 2 today. So the structure, we talk about at the highest level, FR0 and DP0. And then we could have the DPs. So we're kind of narrowing scope as we go from left to right. Why, what, how. So we've got a horizontal decomposition into domains and a vertical decomposition from parents to children. So I'll take the top level, FR and DP, and decompose them into some number of parts. It doesn't have to be 3. It has to be at least 2, because if you don't have at least 2, you haven't decomposed it. And I like to keep it below 7 because it just starts getting difficult to keep track of them if you don't. And then each of these FRs and DPs can be further decomposed into some number of children and even further, until you get down to the leaf level or the nuts and bolts, or a level at which the solution is obvious and we no longer need to decompose. So we're decomposing vertically from abstract to detailed in the design. So somebody's going to let Matt in. There we go. And usually this disrupts the moving to the next slide when I do that, which it's doing again. All right, so here's another look at this. So we start with customer and stakeholders, the customer needs. And then we develop from that the functional requirements. I'm missing an arrow. There we go. And then we have the zigzagging decomposition between the functional requirements and the DPs. Now, I haven't mentioned constraints yet, but we have constraints like cost, weight can be a constraint, space can be a constraint. And so these are things that are difficult to separate. They influence many functions and many of the physical solutions. So these have to be dealt with in a different way, and we have to make sure we don't violate them, and we kind of have to budget, which is not surprising, which is the same thing we usually do, say with money or say weight problems. Okay. So here's a look. Start with the customer needs, develop the functional requirements, zigzagging decomposition, going from abstract to detailed, and we might include the PVs, but not time today. So there's zigzagging decomposition. So we can look at this briefly in terms of set theory. It's pretty simple, but it does tell us there's some rules. And it is surprising to me that we don't do a better job of teaching some design theory and design method. It's also surprising, and we should be teaching that in grade school. We teach science in grade school. And I had, I think, no classmates that ended up doing science. Lots of classmates end up doing design, even ones that don't go to college, ones that are doing trades, are doing lots of design. All right. So Let's take a quick look at set theory, which we should have some familiarity with. And when we break a parent set up into its children, all right, we have these distinct children. And the children should add up to the parent. So when we do the decomposition, it is collectively exhaustive. That means we had to think of everything. And there are some ways you can do that, and we'll save those for another lecture. At the same time, they're collectively exhaustive. They should be mutually exclusive. So they're not overlapping here. They're separate. So that's what this means. So together, we have something that we call CME, collectively exhaustive, mutually exclusive. And so we could also say that if we combine the children, it doesn't need to be a sum, but some combination of the children will equal the parent. Okay, so let's see an example. So this is, and I think I've got a picture here in a moment. But so the jigging attachment goes on a Haas mini mill. Jiggers cost about $100,000, and they're for making nice, precise holes in ceramics, and where you can hold tight tolerances. A mini mill at the time we did this cost $30,000, so much cheaper than a jigger. And the question was, can we make an attachment that will go on the mini mill? And so here we are decomposing it, provide jigging grind capability on a mini mill. And so we had 7 upper level FRs corresponding 7 DPs. To maintain independence, each FR needs its own DP, and we can't reuse one because then we lose independent adjustability. So let's take a look. Now we'll further decompose FR7. So I was working, and here we don't have to appreciate everything and why we did it, but it's a good way to show the design, show progress in the design, be able to build consensus because you can see what everything is there for. When we were working on a crew survivability design for the orbital space plane that the second President Bush canceled, it's hard to make war and explore space at the same time. So he chose war. All right. But so we had over 2,000 FRDP pairs just for safety systems. So when the design is all done, one of the things you would like is in the solid model is to record the design intent with the design solution. So in this solid model, everything is physically integrated into one thing, and those numbers allow us to trace to see what FR is this piece, this DP, physical, part of the physical solution. What FR is it addressing? What function is it fulfilling? This is terribly important. We need to record the design intent, starting with the high-level functions, develop the details. We need FRs before the DPs. And every time we come to this, we need to think, how many DPs can we think of? Because then we can use the axioms to select the best. And it is amazing when I work with mechanical engineers, people who've made it through high school, made it through 3 years of engineering at WPI, and we're working on their MQPs, and they need to transfer a force or a displacement from one place to another. And they come up with something, they grab hold of it, and I say, give me 5 more ways of transferring a force from point A to point B. And they are stumped. So we need to sort of open up and think, how many different ways can we do this? Hydraulically, pneumatically, electromechanically, lever, Bowden cable. So as we work in a discipline, we should be able to have lots of different solutions available for different functions in our minds or in the computer program someplace, and be able to go through them quickly to see which ones provide independence and have the least information content. So let's consider the space program again. So 50 years ago, we were walking on the moon. But we had a son of Massachusetts who directed us there, John Kennedy. We could build another Saturn V moon rocket. We have the plans, but none of the engineers who worked on that are around anymore, and they may not remember why every piece is there. So we could build another Saturn V moon rocket, but we can't change it. The design intent has been lost. All right. So let's take a look at a problem we've been working on in sports engineering. So one of the things that we noticed, a customer need, is there's a lot of injuries, particularly to female players in floor, court, and field sports. Females are at several times the risk of males. And these are largely from ground reaction forces, so that are going through the shoe. So let's take a look and see if we can figure out how to design something. So we would like to absorb potentially injurious loads to the ankle and knee. And where else are we going to do it? We're not going to modify the fields or the courts. So we got to figure out how to do it in a shoe. And so split soles with a tunable spring for force absorption. And let's see how we do this. So on our first prototypes, we actually just took a bandsaw and cut off the bottom of the sole. An important constraint, maintain performance. You could come up with a very safe shoe, but if you're not going to make the team, who cares? So having been a high school and college athlete, I understand very well the importance of maintaining performance. So we want to decompose absorbing potential injurious loads into absorb horizontally and absorb vertically. That should pretty much cover it. And so we need some sort of sliding horizontal tunable force system for absorbing the horizontal loads and some sort of vertical system under the heel for the vertical loads. So now let's see if we can decompose the horizontal loads. And we do this somewhat in a Cartesian manner. So we look fore aft, lateral medial in the heel, all the diagonals. Let's see, lateral medial in the toe and the heel, right? So anyway, so that seems to cover it pretty well. We need some sort of theme so we can see how we're doing. And so here the theme is largely Cartesian. We got to get all the directions and the rotations. So let's see. So here's some detail on that first branch that I was just talking about. And so here's some detail on the design parameters. And that insert is actually a picture of an earlier prototype that and that little layer there contains this. This is where the sole can slide, and that's where the springs are. So we had to get special springs and develop these tunable springs that we see diagrammatically over here on the right that are nonlinear. And that is an important step. So anyway, so those are identified on the physical model. So if we take a look now at the matrix as we looked at for the faucets a little while ago, and so here's the functional requirements we just looked at, and here's the design parameters. This is the way we're trying to meet them. And if we put together a matrix, we would really like, a diagonal matrix. And we can see some of this matrix is diagonal, but we've got a bunch of off-diagonal terms. And these off-diagonal terms mean that I'm not going to have good adjustability because I change one thing and some other things change that I didn't intend to have changed when I do that. So we've got some challenges in the shoe because we need to keep it light, we need to keep it flexible, So we can plane it well, and we need to only transmit forces that might cause injury. So anyway, so now we've talked a little bit about axiomatic design. Algorithmic design is the one that is probably often used, often talked about. I know Dartmouth had a summer camp all on algorithmic design. They had a t-shirt like this, but there's some issues here. One is built-in iterations. You're going around in a circle and I don't see any way out. So when do you stop going around and how do you measure progress? So when we get here after researching and brainstorming, how do we select? How do we choose? We have no guidance for doing this. And that's what the axioms could help us with. And then redesign. Must we redesign? Why can't we get it right the first time? We've had several MQPs, one that had 73 different parts that included a motor as one part. Very intricate design. Worked first try, no adjustment required. Because the axiomatic design helps us do some essentially functional modeling. So algorithmic is the one that's most often used. And algorithmic assumes that if I go through this process, I'll have a good result. And that is necessary, but not sufficient. It requires iteration, as we just saw, some trial and error. And it is subjective. So it lacks clear criteria for selecting the best solution. Whereas axiomatic, it's objective, it's clearly functionally oriented, it guarantees the best solution. And it has a structure and process for applying the axioms. All right, let's see. So as we develop this, what we're just looking at, and when we talk about these independence, what we're really talking about is developing orthogonal systems of functional requirements and solutions. So we're talking about a kind of like a free body diagram that we use when we're doing statics and dynamics problems. These facilitate applying Newton's laws. Without the free body diagram, we would be having some difficulties. So the design decomposition are essentially the same sorts of multidimensional orthogonal spaces that we have in conventional mechanics. And these multidimensional orthogonal spaces facilitate applying Sue's axioms. So just note that the ability to decompose a problem into smaller elements is a key to solving large and complex problems. And so, as we mentioned before, we have to decompose until the solution is obvious, and then we have to integrate the parts together into a single solution. How are we doing on time here? Oh, okay, good. All right. So as we've said, we'll use NOM's axioms to select the best FRs and DPs. We have to create the design in a solution-neutral environment. We have a tendency as engineers to think well and quickly in the physical domain. But until we really figure out what the FRs are, we don't have a basis for selecting which physical solution might be the best. Formulating good functional requirements is important. No design is going to be better than its functional requirements. Formulating these takes time, and it adds value to the design. And it is often difficult for managers to appreciate what a good decomposition has done for you and how much effort that is worth. So let's see. What is design thinking? We talk a lot about, oh, we're doing design thinking. So I think one of the best definitions, and it's certainly emphasized by Sue's work, but it actually was first, at least the first time I'm aware of it clearly, was Louis Sullivan, the architect, who said form follows function. So what does that building need to do? And let's design around that function. So based on customer needs, develop functions first, and then select from design parameters. All right, so I would like to contend that NOM really transformed engineering design from basically a philosophic experiential discipline that has standards and best practices. So with NOM's attention, it becomes a scientific discipline supported by NOM's discovery of the design axioms. So we're at a neat time in engineering design. And what we would really like to do is ride these powerful waves of transformation ahead of the others by using axiomatic design. So NOM's written 3 books on axiomatic design. The first, 1990, The Principles of Design. One of the reasons I think he does this is because so many people have already made up their minds that design can't have axioms. And so it was difficult publishing papers, easier just to go out and do a book. I believe especially The Principles of Design, the 1990 book, is very special. All right, so NOM, after he leaves MIT for a short time to go head the manufacturing directorate at the National Science Foundation. And my advisor served under him, directly under him there. My advisor was von Turkovich. And then he goes back to MIT and accepts a position in Korea at KAIST. And one of the things he did there was develop the OLIVE, the online electric vehicle. Korea has to import all of its oil. So how could vehicles run around without using gasoline? So they invented a system that many people thought was impossible, where power is broadcast from coils buried in the road over a 20-centimeter gap to where it can be accepted by coils in the vehicle and used to charge a small battery. For electric vehicles, batteries are half the weight and half the cost of the car. They only last 5 years, and there is not enough material in the world to supply all of the car batteries. So we'll have to be taking it out of the ocean somehow. But unless we go to some systems like this. The other thing he did, South Korea has to export its stuff. And so the idea was, can we load and unload ships at sea? And so this is a hovercraft, and so picking up containers at sea and stacking them onto another boat in high seas is a challenging problem, clearly. And so they were both addressed in axiomatic design and developed in about 2 years. All right, creativity, innovation, and axiomatic design. I think that we've got a nice innovation center at WPI. And I think it could be even better if we would use some of these things that we've just been looking at. So creativity, it's generating valuable new ideas. Innovation is making these new ideas viable. And in axiomatic design, we've got a way of selecting the most viable ideas. by applying the axioms. So, what do we need to do or be aware of as we're doing engineering design? Ethics. First canon of engineering ethics. Who knows it? It is hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public. So if it's not ethical, if what you're doing does not apply, is not covered by this axiom, is it engineering? If you're not doing ethical engineering, is it really engineering? So on that, thank you very much for your kind attention. And I will stop sharing my screen.
Yeah, okay, that is great. That is great. Yeah, thank you very much, Chris. So for the students or other audience, if you have questions, you can raise your hand, and then I can unmute you and you can ask your questions. So anyone there? So before students ask a question, I actually want to ask something. It is a very good opportunity for me to listen your whole talk on this. So actually, because my background is on materials, so in materials we also have some scientists working on how to design, the essentially not the materials, but how to design the new materials. I don't know if you know Professor Greg Olson, which is kind of like my hero to design new materials. He published a couple papers, kind of like very similar to the topic you mentioned about. So I probably will share some of his paper with you. So probably we can have some discussion to see how to further apply the approach you mentioned, right, to the new material.
Great, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, most people, most engineers and most scientists do some combination of science and engineering.
Yeah. Okay. So any questions from students? So please raise your hand. I'm scrolling down to see.
So is anybody still awake? There are days when I think I may have missed my calling and I should have been in anesthesiology because I look out and so many people are asleep. I am wearing my axiomatic design shirt, which was designed by Professor Walter Towner. Oh, okay, Christopher Collins.
Okay, let me hold on. Zhao Long has a question, so let me see. Yeah, go ahead, Zhao Long.
Yep. Hello, Professor Brown. In your presentation, you did a little bit comparison of axiomatic design and algorithm design. I'm sorry, I probably pronounced that word wrong. So my question is, sometimes we have a system designed already. This system is not designed by axiomatic design method, and I know commonly, as our discussion before, commonly we suggest design the system from axiomatic design theory from the very beginning. But sometimes the system itself has already been designed. Can we use axiomatic design theory to guide the modification or optimization of the traditional design process?
Yeah, I've done that. Nam officially says in his book that you should just start all over again. And that might be a better solution, but that's not always an option. So yes, but what you need to do is sort of go through those steps, figure out what the functions are that you're trying to address. It's actually one way of breaking patents too. A lot of people who apply for patents give a physical solution, but they haven't carefully thought through the functions and what all of the options, other options are. So I've also taught that in industry. But yeah, sometimes you have to take an existing design and figure out how can we do the best with this, and work within some financial constraints. Yeah, it's possible to do, but it's not the best way to do it.
Yeah, the best way always to design from the very beginning,
Yeah.
from the scratch.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when we are doing that, so we should pay more attention to the functional requirements versus design parameter metrics, or should we pay more attention to design parameter to process variable metrics?
Well, it depends what the problem is. So one of the problems we had was there's a company that was making solid oxide fuel cells, and they had started off with a lot of government aid to encourage this, which was probably appropriate because otherwise nobody was going to invest in that. But then the government aid, as it's withdrawn, they have to figure out how to get more and more efficient. And so after they had done all the easy things, actually Professor Towner and I got a crack at it. And one of the, so we spent a couple days with them just figuring out what the real FRs were and what the current DPs were. The poor boss was, and then the PVs on top of that, because it's a manufacturing facility. So we were looking for a value chain. So what do the customers need? All right, so what are the real FRs that we need? How are those currently being addressed? And then getting to the process. Now you could go through the process and say, where is this in the value chain? Is there no link to the customer need? Then get rid of it. So along with this CN, FR, DP, PV comes the value, which is in the eyes of the customer, which is right out of lean manufacturing. So yeah, so you can definitely do process variables and designing the manufacturing systems.
Okay, so which means in the example you gave us, which means we can use some factors to restrain, to limit the informations, such as some of the processes or parts is no value added to the customer requirements. So we can eliminate it by like kind of cost consideration, something like that, right?
Yeah, you can. It's not always possible to do everything too when you're looking at an existing design or even a design that's in process. I was looking at with some engineers at designing some systems that would go on an airplane that they were enlarging. It already existed in a smaller version, and they were doing the stretch. And they wanted to deliver some air without turbulence and without losing pressure, even at a fairly high flow rate. And the space they were leaving for them to work with was very torturous, and there was just no way through it without turbulence and losing pressure and turbulence. So it's not always possible to do. What they needed to do was go back up in the design and somehow maybe get a higher priority for the airflow if they wanted it to maintain its energy. And so yeah. Anyway, there's more to it. You got to look at what are going to be the most difficult problems to solve, and solve those first, so they get priority over like space.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Brown.
Yeah, okay, that is great. Yeah, so with that, I'm trying to announce the success of today's seminar. So thanks everyone for attending the seminar. So see you all in next week.
All right, could I say something?
Yes.
All right, so this discussion was a little limited. I don't know if we can stay on, but if anybody would like to discuss further and we can't stay on here, I can set up a Zoom, or you can email me and we can set up some other Zooms. I this is terribly important, being able to do design. And we do so little of this in the United States, and I think engineering schools all over the world. We're part of an international group, the International Conference on Axiomatic Design, that was co-hosted here at WPI by me and Professor Bergstrom and Professor Towner. And there's opportunities to get involved with that. There's lots we can do, and I've got a course, Axiomatic Design and Manufacturing Processes, that I offer online when it's not offered on campus. So, thank you very much again for your attention, and thanks for the opportunity to do this.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, thank you very much, Professor Brown, and also thanks for other audience. Yeah. Okay, so see you all in next week.